everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Last August, Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone was a guest on Another View, and he talked about gun violence and the impact on our community, particularly the impact on young African-American males living in poverty. He said it's beyond a law enforcement issue and is now a public health issue. That was before coronavirus. Now that we're in the midst of the pandemic, have things changed? Is gun violence down? Are black males still killing each other at alarming rates? Has social distancing made a difference? Policing during coronavirus. It's next on Another View, so please stay tuned.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. I hope you are safe and well, and thank you so much for continuing to do what you can to avoid the spread of COVID-19. Before we get into our discussion about gun violence and the pandemic and what's going on within our cities and Hampton Roads and beyond, I want to talk to you a little bit about the New Journal and Guide. Back on April the 9th, publisher Brenda Andrews announced that she would have to stop the printing of the 120-year-old newspaper that services the African-American community because advertisers had pulled out and the locations where she would distribute the paper were closed because of the pandemic and because of social distancing. Well, the good news is that as of today, the newjournalandguide.com, a brand new website is up. It is running. It is beautiful. Please go to the website. Please support the New Journal and Guide. And not only by going to the website, but also think about becoming a subscriber. One of the problems that Brenda had was that not only did advertisers drop out, but she also doesn't have a very strong base anymore of subscribers. And as we all know, for all of the newspapers, that is truly an issue. So the newjournalandguide.com. And if you want to know more about what happened with the New Journal and Guide, this story actually went national on NPR. Please check out Sam Turkin's report on WHRV-FM. You can find it at whro.org. To get into our story today, or our topic today on gun violence, please listen to this news report, also by WHRV news reporter Sam Turkin, about gun violence.
This is WHRV News. I'm Sam Turkin. While the coronavirus still drastically impacts our lives, it's having a mixed effect on crime. Some Hampton Roads police departments are seeing decreases in certain types of offenses, but gun violence is still happening. Last Friday night was especially violent in Newport News. This video clip is from NBC affiliate Wavy TV.
Breaking news from the peninsula, where police are investigating 2 late-night shootings, one of which was deadly.
Newport News Police Chief Steve Drew says the COVID-19 outbreak hasn't changed gun violence in the city.
An individual was walking down the street 2 weeks ago. Some girls were at a store. They start having words with this guy walking down the street. He stops, turns and fires rounds, and they both get struck.
In Norfolk, the rate of shootings is up since February compared to last year. Lori Haas is with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. She says the pandemic doesn't change the root cause for many shootings.
Disparities in housing, disparities in education, more exposure, more risk of gun violence. Inequities cause all these underlying risks.
Despite the shootings, Norfolk police say overall violent crime and home burglaries are down over the past 2 months compared to last year. Police are also receiving more calls involving domestic disputes. Sam Turkin, WHRV News.
Now, we all know that gun violence is not new, but Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone takes it further. He says that we've moved beyond a law enforcement issue to a public health issue. He's here with us today with an update on his Guns Down movement in light of the coronavirus pandemic, as well as how his officers are faring during this time. How are you, Chief Boone?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you back on the show. Thank you so much. And also joining us is Dr. Leonard Weireter. He is a professor at Eastern Virginia Medical School, School of Health Professions, and the former medical director of the trauma service at Sentara Norfolk General Hospital. Dr. Weireter, how are you?
I'm doing well, Barbara. How are you today?
Good. I'm doing great. Thank you both, gentlemen, for joining me. So, Chief Boone, let me start with you. First of all, how are you doing and how are you faring in light of the pandemic, and how are your officers doing?
Well, as you know, this is a brand new world in terms of policing and everything else. Personally, I'm doing fine. My family is fine.
Good.
I want to take this opportunity to commend the women and men of the Norfolk Police Department. As always, they have risen to the challenge, and for now, we're doing really, really well. You know, we took some initial steps as it relates to COVID-19. I want to say back in late February, early March, we reduced our footprint in the community by reducing the type of calls for service that we would respond to. But we also provided the citizens a means in which they could report nonviolent crime online.
So can you give us an example of what you stopped going out to cover,
Sure.
as opposed to reporting online?
Yeah, larcenies, minor car accidents, things of that nature, property crime, the long short of it.
Okay.
And we provided a means where the citizens could report property crime online through our CopLogic software program. We've issued a host of personal protective equipment to our officers. We've received donations. There are things that we bought personally, and I just want to take this opportunity to also thank Operation Blessings, because they sort of provided us a jump start with some of our personal protective equipment. And city government has also provided a means to help protect our officers while they're out on the street. Barbara, one of the things we do to ensure that our officers are safe so that they don't take anything home to their family or take anything to our citizens is we check their temperature before they hit the streets. And if they fall in line within, that they're safe, we give them a color-coded band for the day.
So you can make sure everybody gets tested every day.
Yeah, that's correct. That way, fellow officers know who's been tested and who hadn't been tested with respect to their temperature. We've been fortunate so far. There's been no infections. We've had a couple exposures, but fortunately, the officer was not infected. Our biggest challenge, particularly early on, was ensuring that folks were not gathering in large populations. We had groups, I should say, throughout the city when the governor put out his mandate that, we had groups up to 100 sometimes gathering. And unfortunately, most, if not all, those groups, when we went to disperse, they understood and they dispersed. So that's kind of how we are treading right now.
Okay.
And so far, so good.
So where are we then in terms of gun violence and shootings as well as homicides during this time? Do you notice a difference? Are the numbers down or up or the same? Or
so let's start with our homicides first. Okay. Our homicides are, I think we're up by one. But the interesting thing,
year to year comparison. Okay.
Yeah, year to year, meaning this time compared to last year.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. In March, we had 2 domestic-related homicides, and in one of those homicides, the individual ended up committing suicide as well. So, and I bring up the domestic piece because, folks with the stay-at-home mandate, folks tend to get a bit irritable at some point, and domestic violence tend to go up. Now, we've been treading somewhat evenly compared to last year. Here recently, though, in the last couple of weeks, we have seen an increase in domestic-related type crimes. Shootings have gone up slightly, as you know, and as I've said many a times before, the folks that are going to violate the law, they're going to violate the law regardless of a virus or not. So we still have our hands full in addressing gun violence. And so that's where we are right now, Barbara. I see a significant decrease in crime overall.
Significant decrease in crime.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, we're looking at a 8% decrease in crime throughout the city. Our only challenge is with respect to crime is shootings, and we're starting to go up slightly with respect to domestic violence.
Okay. All right. So, Chief, you were on the show last August, and we talked about your Guns Down movement. And you spent the majority of the summer going to various communities, holding these rallies when we were all able to gather together, and really talking about the impact of gun violence and how it has moved to a public health issue. Can you go back a little bit and explain to those who may not have been aware from your first visit with us why you say this is more than law enforcement, this is now a public health issue?
So one of the things I did, Barbara, is I captured gun violence, gun homicides, for the last 30 years, and I captured 30 years because that's how long I've been on the Norfolk Police Department. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to take a look at the demographics as it related to gun violence and who it was impacting the most. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is I recall reading a newspaper article, and the article had a still life photograph of 3 young black men, and each of them had a firearm in their hand. And I want to say 3 to 4 months later, 2 of the young men in the photograph had succumbed to gun violence. So I wanted, one, to know who and why gun violence was impacting young African-American men so much. And one of the things we were able to discover, and looking at the data for the last 30 years, we had roughly 1,000 homicides from 1989 to 2019. And out of that 1,780 were young black males. And in the last 3 years, we started a process in which we started recovering guns. And we wanted to take a step further. When we recovered the gun, we wanted to trace back the origin of the gun and who was the original gun owner and where the gun ultimately ended up. So what we found in the last 3 years, we recovered 2,143 guns. Mm-hmm. Out of that 2,143, only 226 were reported lost or stolen. Now, there's a flaw in the system when we are able to recover that many guns and only 200 or so are reported lost or stolen. So what we created was this map. The map shows where the gun was recovered and who we recovered the gun from. Mm-hmm. And most of the guns we recovered was from young black men, as young as 11 in some cases, in some of our most challenging communities. And that community was one of the communities that encompassed our poverty map as well. Mm-hmm. You know, and Dr. Weireter could speak to this. I would guarantee you if there was a health map that Sentara has, and I'm sure they do, where they can take a look at this map and see who's most impacted by health issues. I would guarantee you that that map would interface nicely with our gun violence, with our poverty, and those impacted by health concerns.
Doctor,
And as
go ahead. Go ahead and finish. I'm sorry.
No, I was just simply going to say, a lot of these issues are social economic issues, and we've known that. We've always known it, but we just aren't galvanizing enough strategically to impact those issues.
Dr. Weireter, I wanted to bring you in on this conversation too, because you were the head of trauma for the medical director for the trauma service at Sentara Norfolk General. And I know that there are people who are listening right now who are saying to themselves, well, you know what? I own a gun. I'm responsible. Those are just those people killing each other. And it doesn't affect me. But this is real life and real people. Can you make this real for us in terms of beyond the numbers, but the people that you've met and what they go through with this type of trauma?
Sure, Barbara. Everything the chief says about if Norfolk General had a map of where these injuries occur, it superimposes on his map pretty reliably because we've done some of that comparison. So to go back in my own history, there are a handful of cases that really stand out. So several years ago, there was a young college-age man who was at a gathering at the beginning of the school year. He was shot in the head and died several hours later. His parents did not live in the immediate Hampton Roads area. They came into town, and I'm sitting talking to Dad. Now, Mom and Dad are professionally educated people who live a very nice life. They lived an upper middle-class life. And all Dad could ask me was why. And I have no idea how to answer that question. I've spoken to mothers who say, this is the second child I've lost in the last 2 or 3 years to gun violence. They ask the same question, why? And you can't touch that. I can talk to you about your high blood pressure, about your diabetes, and about the why and why not, but you can't touch this. It is not just the idea that these people in these neighborhoods, this is random. This can occur to anyone in any kind of circumstance. And people have to sort of get beyond that prejudiced mindset that says, no, it can't touch us, because it certainly can.
So what elevates it then to a public health crisis? I mean, we're in the middle of a public health crisis right now with the pandemic. I mean, everybody gets it. It affects everyone. And it's shut the country down, basically. Would people see gun violence, and particularly gun violence among young African-American males, in that same vein?
Well, it's interesting you ask it that way. Certainly, COVID has pushed everything else off the front pages for the last couple of months. But to the chief's point, and to help with the data he presents, let's look at a longer-term picture. So if we go back to the late 1990s, okay, there has been a 22% decrease in the motor vehicle death rate, yet a 17% increase in the firearm intentional death rate. And much to the chief's point, at Norfolk General, easily 80% of the handgun or the weapon-related injury we would see was in the younger African-American male. Again, to the chief's point, we see a lot of people cooped up because they're staying home.
Wow.
People get antsy and agitated. Well, when the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma began to look at this as a public health problem, you begin to uncover lots of information. So, for instance, 35% of American households have at least one gun. That means there are roughly 22 million children living in a home with a firearm. Now, that isn't necessarily good or bad. But of those households, 43% keep a gun unlocked, and 9% keep one unlocked and loaded. So we now have an unlocked and loaded weapon in a situation where people are getting antsy and agitated. And if I can reach for a tool to solve a problem, but that tool has lethal capability, this is a formula for disaster. Yet it doesn't have the same appeal as heart disease, as cancer, as whatever other disease you want. It doesn't doesn't inflame people to action the same way.
The same way. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about gun violence and what we as a community can do to stop the violence. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Chief Boone, when you talk to young men who have been involved in a shooting, whether it's homicide or it's a shooting or whatever, what do they say to you? I mean, do they actually recognize and realize just how permanent it could be in terms of what they've done?
I can give you two specific examples. One example is one of the young men that was in the photograph that I mentioned earlier. I had an opportunity to meet him offline through a friend, and when I spoke to him, I asked, "Why do you young men carry these guns?" And his response was, "Well, we carry them as a form of protection. Where I'm from, everyone feels the need to have a form of protection." I asked about, the sanctity of life, and it was like that meant nothing to him, and I could see in his eyes that meant nothing to him. And I asked the other question was, what would make you put your gun down, or you and your friends put your guns down? He said opportunities in terms of employment. A lot of these young men, they live in these communities where there's very little hope. They have hope in terms of the next day. They don't see the long playing field. They're living day to day, and they don't mind pulling that trigger. But the other piece of that is they're innocent in the sense that if you talk to them and you talk to them with compassion. For an example, I once said to a young man, "I wish I was your father." And when I said that, his emotional reaction, I could tell he was starving for someone to say that they cared about him, and that to be a man, and he got very emotional, and it just dawned on me, these are just young men. They're young men trying to be tough because of where they're from. But you get them alone and one-on-one, you say the right things that most fathers would say to their sons anyway, they tend to break down.
Dr. Weireter, does the CDC consider gun violence a public health issue?
The CDC, I think, if you ask them, would consider this a public health problem, yes. The thing is, it is so far down on the funding stream for research and so far down on their checklist that while it makes the list, it's just not very high. And that's problematic. If you look at National Institute of Health research funding for a plethora of diseases, and if we take diseases with similar mortality, so we took at heart disease, cancer, falls in the elderly, those kind of diseases, violence from weapons is funded at 1.6% of those other diseases with similar mortality burden.
So what would it take to turn that around? What would it take to make them, put money towards research so that we really could get down to a solution?
Well, there was a stance in Congress coming out of the 90s that really did not allow the CDC or the government to expend financial resources to investigate weapon-related violence. That's since been changed. But we come back to this persona, this mindset on the part of the public that this is another population's problem that they brought on themselves. And to the chief's point, we from the medical world, I can deal with the medical, the wounds, those things. The bigger sociology problems I can't touch without a lot of help. How I recruit additional troops, how I recruit additional resources to help deal with those problems, we need to do this as a society. And until we can begin to successfully recruit as a society, we're going to be hard-pressed to mobilize the resources. I mean, I have very good friends and partners who are cancer surgeons. If you look at the way the breast cancer movement has mobilized people and then resources to raise awareness and funding for breast cancer, it's tremendous to see. We have this other disease, which has a comparable morbidity and mortality that barely gets recognition
whatsoever. If you're just joining us, we're talking about gun violence in Norfolk and Hampton Roads and beyond, and what we all can do to help stop it. My guests are Norfolk Police Chief Larry Boone and Dr. Leonard Weireter, Jr., professor at EVMS and former medical director of the trauma service at Sentara Norfolk General Hospital. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Drew joins us from Hampton. Hi, Drew. You're on the air.
Hello. How are you today?
Okay. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Just trying to stay safe.
Absolutely. Good.
I see it as two problems that we have here. Number one, there is a direct correlation between the number of guns in an environment and the number of people injured by those guns. But there's also the human aspect. It's the person that's committing the harm to other people. I can understand if you write laws and change laws to take guns away from honest people, but you're not going to take guns away from dishonest people. The criminals are still going to have their guns. So how would I have the means to defend myself if I follow the laws?
Okay, let's let Police Chief Larry Boone respond to that. Thanks so much for the call, Drew. I appreciate it, and stay safe. Chief Boone?
Well, let me just say this. I am a huge supporter of the Second Amendment. To get where I currently stand as police chief, I've taken the oath 9 times. I've owned several guns, but I'm a responsible gun owner. When I go home, my gun is placed in a safe box. A lot of these guns, as I mentioned earlier, since in the last 3 years, we've recovered a little over 2,000 guns, okay? And only a little bit over 200 were reported lost or stolen. One of the things we have to do is start being responsible gun owners. For the most part, these kids are getting their hands on these guns through individuals leaving their guns in plain view. For an example, you take a kid that I characterized earlier from one of these communities. He didn't have 2 nickels, and he's walking down the street, and he sees this gun in plain view in the front seat. He's going to break that window, and he's going to get that gun. He's going to use that gun, okay? And we're going to arrest him, and we're going to charge him with that crime. What happens to that gun owner? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you have this kid who is now part of the system. And once you get in that system, it's very difficult to get out of. So this is twofold, okay? I know the governor here recently passed a legislation where that you have to report your gun lost or stolen within 48 hours. That's going to take some time to have any impact. That's not an overnight fix. We can greatly reduce a lot of these gun issues by simply taking care of our guns. But I can tell you a lot of the individuals that we arrest are getting their hands on guns that were either lost or stolen, and we don't know anything about it until we started doing the backtracking. A lot of police departments don't do that. One of the practices we used to do in the past or early on, if there's a crime involving a gun, we would voucher that gun, and that was the end of it. The gun was just prey to the crime. Now what we do systematically, we're going to investigate the gun along with the crime, and we started knocking on doors saying, Mr. Smith, do you know where your gun is? Okay, because I will tell you, some of these people are doing straw purchases, okay? And the reason we knock on doors is to change behavior, okay? It's sort of like the person speeding down the street where you see the speed board. It tells you you're going too fast, and you tend to slow down. That's going to change your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The police department knocking on your door, asking do you know where your gun is going to change that behavior as well. Because I will tell you, some guns are legitimately stolen, some are legitimately lost, but some are getting in the hands of these kids by straw purchasing, which is illegal.
Exactly. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Keith joins us from Chesapeake. Hi, Keith. You're on the air.
Hi, Kathy. How are you doing?
I'm Barbara, but I'm fine.
I want to say I have a great deal of respect for Chief Boone, and I like what he's saying. What I would like to say is I'm in a position for error. I deal with a lot of these kids before they get out of prison, and they're starving for adult leadership where they lost it in the household or wherever they lost it. They're looking for a father or a responsible mother figure that's going to tell them when they're doing wrong, drag them off the street when they think they're getting in trouble. And these kids, when I talk to them, I actually talk to them in the harshest manner I can, as a father would talk to his son if he had made a grave error. And I throw out there, just like Chief Boone says, put yourself in this position. Why would you act like that with this? And last, I've owned guns, grew up with guns. They've always been loaded. But the one thing I learned, your responsibilities with a gun are of the highest. If you lose it and you don't report it, you should be prosecuted. Because that gun is going to turn up wrong.
Keith, thanks so much for the call. Please stay safe. Chief Boone, you want to respond?
Well, I appreciate Keith saying that. And he certainly understands that. He hit the nail on the head. A lot of these young men, 9 times out of 10, they're looking for someone simply to put their hands on their head or shoulder and say, I believe in you. I'm going to support you. And not just by words, okay, by action. I currently mentor 2 young men. They're a handful, but I don't give up on them. I've been called in the middle of the night out of my bed to go look for them. They're in the custody of PD, but at the same time, I don't give up on them because I see progress. I'm seeing progress in these young men, and the last caller, he hit the nail on the head. They are simply looking for adult leadership, and it has to be something that's sustainable, not just in a moment or not just for a photo op. It has to be something that's genuine. And, myself coming from an environment such as the environments we're talking to today, if I did not have that, I would be one of these statistics. And I know that, genuine interest in your well-being certainly makes a difference.
Okay, our phone lines are lit up, so I'm going to go to the next call. Ashley joins us from Smithfield. Hi, Ashley. You're on the air.
Hello, Barbara. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
I just think it's kind of silly that Australia figured out how to fix their stuff. We're talking about like the outback craziness. They seemingly figured out how you can own a gun and you can still live your life. Now, granted, I don't own a gun, and it's up to you if you want to or not. But I think it's okay to have that much regulation per se. Like if you have to have a driver's license to drive your car. Your car's got to be registered. I don't understand why people think this is a hard concept. And not only that, too, I do believe in diversion projects for those that are at risk, our youth. So that would be a helpful thing. But I think the mainstay is, you're right, the responsibility. But we shouldn't be afraid of having those regulations like we have with our car. A car could kill you easily, just as a gun could kill you.
Okay, Ashley, thanks so much. Please stay safe, and we appreciate the call. I want to go to Mark in Norfolk. Hi, Mark. You're on the air.
Yeah, good afternoon to you, Barbara, and the Chief. I just want to slightly kind of just push back a little bit on what the chief said in the scenario where if I, a concealed carrying weapons owner, if I left my gun in my car, that I should be prosecuted if someone else didn't exercise the discipline not to commit a crime, to break in my car and steal my gun. If it was in my house around my 4 children, I would agree with you 100%. But I just think we're giving too much ground to try to answer, issues that have nothing to do with the problem. The problem is just sociological, systemic issues that honestly are perpetrated and propped up to continue the crime wave so that the statistics and that the underclass remain the same. And this last, in closing, I think the issue, and I've had several police friends of mine in law enforcement agree, if the court and the police enforcing agencies could work something out to where the enforcing agencies could have more latitude to work out problem resolutions at the street level, we would see a big change in our crime and judicial system.
Okay, Mark, let me let the chief respond to you. Thanks so much for the call. Chief?
Well, a lot of what Mark said is correct, and a lot of what he said is not correct. One of the things I said, a gun being left in plain view, meaning you walk by and you're able to see it. It's not in a glove compartment or anything like that. I mentioned that because that happens. It actually happens. That's not being responsible. 2, I would never leave my gun in my vehicle, whether it was in a compartment or not. That's not being responsible. I just wouldn't do that. Number 3, he mentioned the courts and law enforcement getting together to impact the behavior of our youth. That's part of our job, but it's not our job solely. You have heard me say, and I'll continue to say, we're going to continue to deal with these issues that are largely in part socioeconomic, that's been around generations upon generations. Police departments have been used as agents of social control to try to fix this. This is a community issue. We need to address this just like we did with respect to e-cigarettes. 6 individuals died in the country due to e-cigarettes. We galvanized around that issue like nobody's business. Okay? We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of individuals die every day due to homicides and gun violence. And yet we barely lift a finger.
Dr. Weireter, what are you teaching your students at EVMS as they prepare to work in public health and so forth in terms of dealing with this? Because I guess you do have to take on some of the sociological aspects of it as well as administer medicine.
Sure. So teaching them about the wound care and how to resuscitate the victims is critical because we're out to save lives, and our ability to save lives is very, very good. The public health side, though, is a much tougher nut to crack. The nice thing about this COVID crisis, if there is one, is you see high-quality, well-trained, well-spoken public health professionals talking to you about what good public health looks like. So trying to take the junior trainee, the medical student, the junior resident, and have them invest the time in talking to a patient and a patient's family about what's going on at home. You're not taking your hypertension medicines. Do you have a weapon? For years, physicians were not allowed to ask whether there was a weapon in the home. We can now. If you have a weapon, how do you secure it? How do you deal with anger issues? Is anger management helpful? Conflict resolution. How do you deal with conflict in the community? These are all part and parcel of what you try to teach young trainees. It's difficult. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of resource that communities may or may not have to expend. Unfortunately, I've seen the resources used, but only after the fact. So, for instance, I have seen, like the chief, young men who had this awakening moment. Unfortunately, in my experience, they have a devastating injury, which forces the awakening moment, and then they're open to being helped. But until that point in time, it is a very difficult problem. And as I've said before, it is so far down on anyone's current radar screen as a problem to go after. It's just really sad.
So, Chief Boone, what else can we do as a community? You mentioned mentoring. We mentioned about responsible gun ownership. But what else can we do to reach these kids, I call them, young people in particular, to just get away from even making gun usage a part of their life?
Well, Barbara, I think we touched on that somewhat during this process in terms of showing the kid that you care about them, there's opportunities for them. But I think the most important part first is when there's an issue, there needs to be policy first in order to address the issue, because it's hard to change human behavior. It's much easier to change policy. I'll give you an example. During the civil rights, when we were marching, when I say we African Americans for equality, we weren't marching to say, please like me, please change your behavior. We were marching for policy change. And only after policy change was behavior change impacted. Now, we still have some ways to go, but there was significant impact by way of policy change that changed behavior. To change people's minds with respect to gun violence and who it impacts, one of the reasons I started collecting the data, to show who's being victimized by homicides and death, I will guarantee you, as I sit here, if every law enforcement department was required to capture that data and put it in a format for all to see, not by zip codes, but by race and gender, you will see information that will make you say, we have to do something. We would be almost bound to do something, because I can tell you right here in Hampton Roads, it's not just here in Norfolk, if every department was mandated to collect data, it shows who's impacted the most and what they're impacted by, there will be no need for discussion. It will be clear and evident that the African-American community, particularly young men, are impacted the most by gun violence. And right now, I don't think that's a mandate. It's something that I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it because I didn't want to just be speaking by sheer emotions. I wanted to show the data. And I will guarantee you, if that was a mandate throughout the country, we'll have a different discussion.
You were placed on the governor's African American, I know I'm not calling the name right, but there's a group policy commission. And is this something that you all are dealing with? I believe Gil Bland is the chair of it.
Yeah, the African American Advisory Board.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is something that I bring up all the time. I bring it up because in order to change behavior for us, when I say us, Americans, we have to show data. And when I showed them the data from Norfolk alone, when we were talking about African Americans in this room, they were shocked to see that. It's one thing to hear about it, and we hear about it a lot with respect to crime and African Americans being involved in gun violence, but it's another thing to see the data. When you're talking about 780 black men killed, and the next category would be 112 white males, and the next category would be 85 black females, and the next would be 21 white females, and the next would be 6 Hispanic males. Okay, and that's just in Norfolk in the last 30 years. I would guarantee that data would look the same in any urban setting throughout the country.
Right. We've only got about 3 minutes left. I want to give each of you gentlemen a chance to give our audience, our listening audience, one thought or one action that you would like them to take as we continue to explore this and to work towards making this a much bigger issue than it is in terms of trying to fix it. So, Dr. Weireter, I'm going to start with you. What would you want to tell people?
I think the chief just said it in his first sentence. This is an us problem. It's not a them problem. It's an us problem. And until we, as an entire society, decide to chase the root causes, which is access to quality education, access to reasonable compensation employment, and that whole litany of things that flow from that, this will be an almost impossible problem to solve.
Okay, that's Dr. Leonard Weireter, Jr., professor at EVMS and former medical director of the trauma service at Sentara Norfolk General Hospital. Thank you so much for joining us. And Chief Boone, you get the last word.
Well, my last words would be, this is the greatest country in the world. We put a man on the moon, and this epidemic, because that's what it is, we can certainly solve this. We're not solving it because it's not important to us, and that saddens me. It should be important to us. As I said previously, 6 individuals died earlier this year with respect to e-cigarettes. Immediately, that became a public health issue. But yet and still, we have Americans, regardless of their color and where they're from, regardless of the cause and effect, dying every day by use of gun violence, and we do nothing. We do nothing substantial.
Well, we will keep talking about it, Chief Boone, because this is clearly an issue that needs to be addressed, and we need to do something and do something quickly. That's Chief Larry Boone, police chief for the city of Norfolk. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. We really appreciate it, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Essie Patha-Murkerson from Law and Order. You are listening to Another View.
That's Todd Washburn. He's always on it. What can I tell you? So we're all looking forward to the day when we can return to doing the social events we've missed so much, like going to the movies. Hollywood is anxious to get us back in the theater, as are the actors and actresses. One such actress is Newport News native Morgan McCoy. Our Lisa Godley spoke with Morgan about her role in the movie Harriet and about her one-woman shows that showcase her many talents.
As an actress and historical interpreter, Morgan McCoy has talked about Harriet Tubman on numerous occasions. But to be cast in the movie Harriet and play opposite Cynthia Erivo is something she describes as both humbling and an honor.
Slow down, Harry. They don't pay us by the bushel.
So I played the character of Jessie. So Jessie is a freed woman, and she meets Harriet after Harriet Tubman emancipates herself. And so she meets her in Philadelphia. They live in the same boarding house, and they both work as domestics together. So Harriet Tubman's character, you'll see my character with her, and we're in our maid uniforms, and we're cleaning, and I'm telling her, Harriet, slow down. You don't have to work that fast. A scene where you see Harriet Tubman is having a very sorrowful moment as she's thinking about the family that she left behind and having to get acclimated to this new life.
Morgan's role as Jessie is just one of many personas she's taken on in her career. She says her goal is to give each character her all, whether it's a television show, a training video, or a feature film, like what you're about to hear from the movie First, Do No Harm.
And good morning, Melissa.
Good morning.
She's had a bit of a sniffle, but she just had to come to school today.
I'm sure she'll be fine. Remember, today is just a half day.
Morgan was a little girl when she was first bitten by the acting bug.
I saw Dr. Mary T. Christian perform James Weldon Johnson's The Creation at the age of 7. And at that time, I was a shy little girl, and Dr. Christian was a close friend of my mother's, and we, would go to her political events and things of that nature. And when I saw Dr. Christian, whom I call Aunt Bootsy, perform, I said, Mom, I want to do that. And so my parents put me in acting classes. Bootsy was like my first acting coach and, encouraged me to do poetry and just things to try to get me out of my shell. And I was one of those kids. My parents put me in tap and voice. I quit everything but acting. It stuck. And I got my first paid production at 14.
And she's been at it ever since. One of her passions, her one-woman shows.
I love my one-woman shows. I have 3. One of them is Evolution of a Black Girl from the Slave House to the White House. It's my first show, my signature show, I'd like to say. And in that, I play 12 characters from the 1600s to present day. And so we travel the centuries and telling the stories of amazing African-American women who've contributed a great deal to our history, and we don't know the details of their lives. And so getting a chance to take audiences on that journey. And it's an encouraging journey. It's an inspirational journey. And there are moments where you might, feel sorrowful, but there are moments where you're excited and motivated and inspired.
Morgan says in that show, one of the characters who inspires her personally is Madam C.J. Walker, who overcame numerous obstacles and was the first female bank president during a time when she couldn't even vote.
I did all this before women even had the right to vote. We were trying to get rights, but I had the desire to fight against racism, to fight against sexism, to fight against my disability and all the odds that were stacked against me. What's your excuse? Here in the 21st century, there's so many things you're already allowed to do. But over here, some of y'all talking about the things you can't do. My suggestion is you find the fight in you.
Morgan says she's had her share of highs and lows throughout her career, but through it all, one thing is certain, her love of performing. And as she pursues her dream, she encourages others to do the same.
You can do anything. You can be anything that you want to be. Of course, in this industry with acting, singing, and the arts, sometimes there are people say, I was a valedictorian in my class, and people told my parents she needs to be a doctor or a lawyer. Are you crazy to let her be an actress? And my mother said, I want her to be who she's called to be, and I want her to do what she's called to do. And so that's what I would tell someone. Be who you're called to be. Do what you're called to do. There will be obstacles, but train. Make sure that you always bring your best foot forward and ask for help.
Since she's had to push the pause button on live performances due to the pandemic, Morgan says she's been reaching out to fans through social media and her YouTube channel. But she can't wait to take center stage again, hopefully this fall. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley.
Just in case I have to run.
She is simply delightful. You have so many choices. So we have, in terms of listening. So we're grateful that you've chosen to spend this time with us here at Another View. Hey, we're making progress on rebuilding our eView newsletter mailing list, but we still need to hear from you. Please, if you haven't already, go to our website, anotherviewradio.org, and sign up for our once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We'd like to stay in touch, and you can also find us on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. And we thank you for continuing to stay at home to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Thank you for washing your hands frequently for at least 20 seconds, wearing a mask when in public places, and practicing social distancing. Let's stay on course because we're all in this together. Next week, Congressman Bobby Scott. That's all I need to say about that. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham, answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Stay safe, everyone. And let's get together again next Thursday at noon for Another View.